have this energizing of activism among women who believes in the power of the elective franchise and in the power of electoral politics to reshape the nation.
A key player in bringing the vote to women nationally was Jeanette Rankin, the first woman to serve in the U.S. Congress. Jeanette Rankin was born on a ranch outside Missoula, Montana in 1980.
She comes from a very well-to-do family. She is expected to devote much of her time to helping raise her sisters and brother.
But her parents also promoted her education. In 1902, Rankin graduated from Montana State University with a degree in biology.
The expectation wasn't that she was going to become a biologist, but that a woman of a certain class should have a good education because this will allow her to be a better wife and mother. But she's very unusual in that she doesn't feel compelled to be married, to have children, which was what women were told was the only goal in life.
After working briefly as a teacher and a seamstress, Rankin moved to New York in 1908 to train at the country's first graduate program in social work.
It's just a few blocks from the Lower East Side. So she is seeing firsthand the tenets, the conditions of poverty, this enormous divide in American cities between the haves and the have-nots. And she's really struck by this. She starts thinking that women need to be involved in politics.
I saw that if we were to have decent laws for children, sanitary jails, safe food supplies, women would have to vote.
Rankin became a field secretary for the National American Women's Suffrage Association, crusading for the vote in 16 states.
As the suffrage movement is really heating up, Jeanette Rankin is coming in just at the right time. She is traveling the country, buttonholing members of Congress. She's going to conventions, ladies' organizations, standing on street corners. Her great strength was as a speaker, and apparently she was just mesmerizing.
Is it not possible that the women of the country have something of value to give to the nation? It is time for our old political doctrines to give way to new visions.
In 1911, Rankin was assigned to lead the suffrage campaign in her home state, Montana. But she faced stiff resistance from men and women opposed to women's vote.
Many women believe that it would undermine their authority in the home, in society. There are a million different cartoons of husband wearing an apron, holding a crying baby, while the wife is smoking a cigar. It will make men effeminate, women masculine. It's unnatural, it's wrong.
But the tide of history was turning. Women had already won the vote in 9 states. And when Montana granted women suffrage in 1914, Jeanette Rankin was inspired to campaign for a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Nothing else will go so far toward overcoming the prejudice against women in office, and nothing would be a greater aid to the feminist movement than to have the higher offices led by women.
The fact that women have the vote in Montana really works to her advantage because she's promoting the kinds of things that most women support. But first and foremost, she wants the vote for women across the nation.
Rankin won her campaign by 10,000 votes, and on April 2nd, 1917, at age 28, was sworn in as the first woman elected to national office in the United States.
I may be the first woman member of Congress, but I will not be the last.
I cannot imagine what it would have been like to be the one woman working with 434 men, many of whom are not happy to see a woman among their ranks. She's barely taken her hat off, and she has to vote on whether or not the United States should enter into World War I.
On Rankin's very first day in office, President Woodrow Wilson asked Congress to vote for a declaration of war against Germany.
And when it's time to vote, she breaks a precedent of 140 years. You're just supposed to say yay or nay, but instead she makes a speech.
I want to stand by my country, but I cannot vote for war. I vote no.
Even though 49 male members of Congress also voted no, Rankin's vote was especially controversial.
She really sets off a whole firestorm. It's just pandemonium. And for many, particularly in the suffrage movement, there is just so much anger and outrage. She's ruined it for us. You are giving the message that women are sentimental, that they can't be trusted with important decisions.
Despite the backlash, Rankin pursued an agenda of reform, introducing a number of bills to increase the rights of women and children, but her biggest goal remained securing the vote nationally.
How shall we explain the meaning of democracy if the same Congress that voted for war to make the world safe for democracy refuses to give this small measure of democracy to the women of our country?
She created a congressional committee on women's suffrage, initiating the legislation that later became the 19th Amendment. But, like many white women of her day, Rankin's record was not as stellar around issues of race.
The very racist Mississippi Senator John Sharp Williams tells her, if we pass your amendment, then Negro women could vote. She responds, but couldn't you keep them from voting the same way you keep the Negro man from voting? It's very disappointing for someone who's so concerned about women's rights that she succumbs to the racism of the day.
By the time the 19th Amendment became law in 1920, Rankin's two-year term was over, and she had lost her re-election campaign. In 1925, Rankin moved to Athens, Georgia, and focused on anti-war activism as a founding member of various peace organizations.
The work of educating the world for peace is a woman's job because men are afraid of being classed as cowards. At the present time, I can see no more urgent cause than outlawing war.
In 1941, at age 60, Rankin campaigned to represent Montana in Congress again.
As World War II in Europe is expanding, there's real fear that the United States will once again be sucked into a war. So it's a good time for her to be re-entering politics. She wants to be at the center of power.
Rankin won. Back in Congress, this time among 9 other women, she made history again.
Jeannette Rankin is the only person in Congress to vote against U.S. entry into World War II, which makes her the only person in American history to have voted against U.S. entry into both wars. This time, she is really vilified. She is so harassed after her vote that she actually takes refuge in a phone booth. And she has to call the congressional office and say, send security down to get me out.
Rankin retired from politics in 1943, but remained active in the peace movement. In 1968, at the age of 87, she led 5,000 women in the Jeannette Rankin Brigade at a Vietnam War demonstration in Washington, D.C.
You can't have freedom for anybody in a society unless you have freedom for everybody. We women should picket everything. This is no time to be polite.
Rankin died in 1973, days shy of her 93rd birthday. A decade later, her statue was installed at the U.S. Capitol.
It's hard enough for anyone to really step up and try to create meaningful change. She chose a very difficult path, and she met with a lot of vilification, and she continued on.
You don't do the right thing because of the consequences. If you are wise, you do it regardless of the consequences. I have nothing left but my integrity.